The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Hannah Zimmerman stepped outside to draw water from the well, and she watched a man tumble from his horse not 50 yards from her small homestead, blood already darkening his shirt beneath the harsh New Mexico sun. Her first instinct was to run inside and bolt the door. A woman alone in the territory had to be careful, especially one whose husband had been dead less than a year. But something about the way the stranger's horse circled back, nudging at his fallen rider with obvious distress, made her hesitate. The animal's loyalty spoke of a good master, and Hannah had learned to trust a horse's judgment better than most people's words. She glanced toward the horizon where dust still hung in the air from whoever had done the shooting, then made her decision. Grabbing her late husband's rifle from inside the door, she approached cautiously, ready to defend herself if this was some kind of trick. The man lay face down in the red dirt, his hat several feet away, dark hair matted with sweat and dust. His breathing came shallow and rapid. When Hannah knelt beside him, keeping the rifle within reach, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 25 or 26. Blood seeped from a wound high on his left shoulder, and another grazed his side. "Can you hear me?" she asked, touching his neck to check for a pulse. It beat strong despite the blood loss. He groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Coming back," he managed, the words barely audible. That decided it. Hannah was no stranger to hard decisions. At 23, she'd already buried her parents, survived the journey west, built a life with Thomas, and then buried him too when fever took him last winter. She'd learned that mercy and caution had to walk hand in hand out here, but she wouldn't leave a wounded man to die in her yard. "Help me then," she said, positioning herself to take some of his weight. "I cannot carry you alone, and I will not leave you for the buzzards." He was a big man, easily 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, but somehow he found the strength to stumble alongside her as she half dragged him toward the house. His horse followed, reins trailing. Once she had the man inside and laid out on her kitchen floor, she tied his horse in the lean-to beside her mule and scanned the horizon again. No sign of riders. Maybe they thought they'd finished the job. Inside, she worked quickly, stripping away his blood-soaked shirt to expose the wounds. The shoulder was the worst, the bullet still lodged inside. The side wound was cleaner, having passed through the flesh without hitting anything vital. She'd done this before, patching up Thomas when he'd had a run-in with a mountain lion, and she'd helped her mother tend to injured travelers on the trail west. She built up the fire, set water to boiling, and laid out clean cloth, needle and thread, and the precious bottle of whiskey she'd been saving. Then she set to work extracting the bullet, grateful the stranger had passed out completely. The lead came free after several tense minutes, and she cleaned the wounds thoroughly before stitching them closed with neat, efficient movements. By the time she finished bandaging his shoulder and side, evening was falling. She managed to drag him into her small bedroom, the only private room in the 2-room house, and cover him with quilts. His fever had already started, his skin hot to the touch. That would be the real battle now. For 3 days, Hannah barely left his side. She sponged him with cool water when the fever raged, forced willow bark tea between his lips when he was coherent enough to swallow, and changed his bandages twice a day. She learned the contours of his face during those days, the strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, the straight nose, the thick lashes that rested against his cheeks. His hands were calloused but well kept, his clothes good quality beneath the trail dust and blood. He talked in his delirium, fragments of sentences that made little sense. Names mostly, Edward and Margaret, references to contracts and water rights, to someone named Curtis who couldn't be trusted. Once he called out for his father, his voice breaking like a boy's despite his size. On the fourth morning, his eyes opened clear for the first time. They were gray, she noticed, like storm clouds over the mountains. He stared at the rough wooden ceiling, then slowly turned his head to take in the small room, his gaze finally landing on Hannah where she sat in the chair beside the bed, mending one of her dresses. "You're awake," she said, setting down her sewing. "How do you feel?" He tried to sit up, winced, and thought better of it. "Like I've been shot." His voice was rough from disuse. "Where am I?" "My home, about 15 miles south of Silverton. You fell near my property line 4 days ago." His hand moved to his shoulder, feeling the bandages. "You pulled the bullet out." "Someone had to." He studied her for a long moment, and she bore the scrutiny calmly. She knew what he saw. A woman still in morning black, too thin from a hard winter alone, blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, blue eyes that had seen their share of sorrow. Not pretty exactly, but strong-featured and capable. "Thank you," he said finally. "I owe you my life. You can thank me by telling me who shot you and whether they're likely to come back." His jaw tightened. "Curtis Webb's men. And no, they think I'm dead in a canyon 20 miles from here. At least, that's where I was meant to end up. My horse had other ideas." "Why did they shoot you?" He hesitated, and she saw him weighing how much to tell her. "A business disagreement. Must have been quite a disagreement. Webb wants something I own, something I won't sell." He decided to take a more direct approach. He tried to sit up again, and this time Hannah moved to help him, propping pillows behind his back. The movement brought her close enough to catch the scent of the soap she'd used to wash him during his fever, mixed with something else, something essentially him. "I'm Isaac," he said. "Isaac Zane." Hannah's hand stilled on the pillow she was adjusting. "Isaac Zane." Even she, isolated as she was, had heard that name. The Zane family owned the largest ranch in the territory, stretching from the mountains to the river valley. They controlled most of the water rights, the railway spur, half the businesses in Silverton itself. The Isaac Zane. "I see my reputation precedes me." There was no arrogance in his tone, just a kind of weariness. "You own half the valley," she said, stepping back from the bed, suddenly aware of how inappropriate it was that she'd been caring for him, seeing him without his shirt, sponging his fevered body. Heat crept up her neck. "My father owned half the valley," Isaac corrected. "He died 6 months ago. Now I suppose I do, along with my sister, though Curtis Webb is doing his best to change that." "Why would he shoot you? Surely there are legal ways to contest property rights." Isaac's laugh was bitter. "You'd think so, but Webb's been systematically buying up or driving out every small rancher and farmer in the territory. My father fought him for years, kept him from getting a monopoly on the water rights. Now that father's gone, Webb thinks I'll be easier to manage. When I refused to sell, he decided to make it look like I was killed by bandits. My death would throw the estate into chaos, and he's positioned himself to sweep in and buy everything during probate." Hannah moved to the window, looking out at her small plot of land. 10 acres of struggling crops and a vegetable garden that had barely kept her fed through the winter. She thought her problems were finding enough money to buy seed for spring planting. These ranch wars seemed like something from another world. "How much does he want?" she asked. "Everything. The whole valley eventually. But he particularly wants the water rights and the railway access. Control those, and he controls every ranch and farm for 100 miles. She turned back to face him. "So what will you do?" "Heal, if you're willing to let me stay a few more days. Then get back to Silverton and make sure Webb doesn't get away with this." "And what's to stop him from trying again?" Isaac's smile was grim. "Nothing, but next time I'll be ready for him." Hannah crossed her arms. "That's a terrible plan." "Do you have a better one?" "Not yet." but getting yourself killed won't help anyone. Over the next week, as Isaac's strength slowly returned, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah would help him sit up for meals, which they ate in the bedroom since he couldn't yet make it to the kitchen table. She brought him books from her small collection, and they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his younger sister Margaret who'd gone back east to school, about his father's vision for the territory as a place where people could build lives without being crushed by men like Curtis Webb. She told him about her journey west with her parents and Thomas, about the cholera that took her mother on the trail, the accident that killed her father the first winter in New Mexico. About Thomas, who'd been kind and steady, who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to make their small homestead prosper, who died still believing better days were coming. "You regret it?" Isaac asked one afternoon as she changed his bandages. The wounds were healing cleanly, and he could move his arm now without too much pain. Coming west, Hannah considered the question as she worked. His skin was warm under her fingers, and she tried to ignore the way touching him made her pulse quicken. That was just loneliness talking, she told herself. Nearly a year without any human contact beyond the occasional trip to town. "No," she said finally. "There was nothing for us back in Missouri. Thomas's family didn't approve of the marriage, and my father had lost his farm to the bank. Out here, at least we had a chance. We had hope. But Thomas is gone and you're alone. I'm surviving. That counts for something." Isaac caught her wrist gently as she reached for the fresh bandage. "It counts for a great deal, but you shouldn't have to just survive, Hannah." The use of her given name sent warmth through her chest. When had they moved from Mrs. Zimmerman to Hannah? She couldn't remember, but it felt natural, right? "None of us get to choose our circumstances," she said softly. "We only choose how we face them." Wise words. My mother's, actually. She said them often on the trail west. Hannah finished the bandaging and stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. "You should rest. The more you push yourself, the longer healing takes." But Isaac was stronger each day. By the 10th day, he was walking around the small house, insisting on helping with chores despite Hannah's protests. She found him outside one morning, attempting to repair a section of fence that had been leaning since winter. "You're going to tear those stitches," she called from the doorway. He looked up, grinning, and her heart did a foolish flip. With his color back and his strength returning, Isaac Zane was undeniably handsome. More than that, he was good company, quick to laugh and easy to talk to. The house felt less empty with him in it. "I'm fine," he said. "Besides, this fence won't fix itself. It's managed not to fall down completely for 6 months. It can wait until you're fully healed. Humor me. I owe you far more than fence repair, and I'm going mad sitting still." She walked out to where he stood, took the hammer from his hand. "At least let me help then. You hold the posts, I'll hammer." They worked together in comfortable silence, the spring sun warm on their backs. When they finished the fence, they moved on to other small repairs that Hannah had been putting off. Isaac rehung the door on the chicken coop, replaced missing shingles on the roof of the lean-to, fixed the pump on the well that had been sticking. Thomas was going to do all this, Hannah said, watching him work on the pump. He had plans for everything. A bigger house, more livestock, maybe fruit trees if we could get them to take in this soil. "You could still do those things." She shook her head. "Not alone. It takes everything I have just to keep what we built from falling apart." Isaac straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. The pump now moved smoothly, water flowing clear and cold. "You don't have to be alone." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. Hannah turned away, her throat tight. "We should go inside. You've done too much already." That evening, as they ate the simple stew she'd prepared, Isaac was quieter than usual. Hannah caught him watching her several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she finally asked. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. "I need to get back to Silverton, let my sister know I'm alive, deal with Webb, but I don't like the idea of leaving you here alone." "I've been alone for months. I'll manage, Hannah." He reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. "Come with me," her heart stuttered. "What?" "Come to Silverton. You could stay at the ranch. Margaret would be happy for the company and you'd be safer there. Webb's men won't dare try anything with witnesses around. I can't just leave my home." "Why not? What's keeping you here?" The question hit harder than it should have. What was keeping her? A half-built dream that had died with Thomas, stubbornness, fear of change. "This is all I have," she said quietly. "It doesn't have to be." Isaac's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "I know it's been less than 2 weeks, and I know I have no right to ask this of you. But Hannah, these last days with you have been the first time since my father died that I've felt like I could breathe. Like there was something worth fighting for beyond just duty and responsibility." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The hope she saw there terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Isaac, I was married. I loved my husband. I know. And I would never ask you to forget him or dishonor his memory, but he's gone and you're still here. You're alive, Hannah." "Doesn't that mean something?" "It means I have to be practical. I can't afford romantic notions." "This isn't a romantic notion." His grip tightened. "Or maybe it is, I don't know anymore. All I know is that when I think about leaving here tomorrow, about riding away and never seeing you again, something in my chest feels like it's being torn in two." Hannah's breath caught. She'd been so careful not to let herself feel anything these past days, to maintain the proper distance between a widow nursing a patient back to health and anything more. But the truth was, she'd been lying to herself. Every time Isaac smiled at her, every conversation they shared, every accidental touch had been weaving something between them, something fragile and precious and absolutely terrifying. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready. Then we'll take it slow. Come to Silverton as a friend, nothing more. Stay at the ranch where you'll be safe and fed and won't have to struggle alone anymore. Let me give you that much at least, for saving my life." And what happens when people talk, when they see the widow Zimmerman staying at the Zane ranch? Let them talk. My sister will be there as chaperone. It will all be perfectly proper. He smiled slightly. "Though I'll admit my motives aren't entirely proper. I want to court you, Hannah. I want the chance to know you better, to see if what I'm feeling is just gratitude or something more." "Will you give me that chance?" She should say no. It was too fast, too complicated. She'd been a widow less than a year. Isaac was practically royalty compared to her modest circumstances. His world of ranch empires and business dealings and men who settled disputes with bullets was so far from the simple life she'd imagined with Thomas. But Thomas was gone, and she was so tired of being alone, so tired of just surviving. And when Isaac looked at her like he was looking at her now, with such open hope and earnestness, she wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be something more for her than this endless gray existence. "One condition," she said. "Anything. If I come with you, and if we discover this feeling between us isn't real, that it's just proximity and gratitude and loneliness, you have to promise you'll let me go. No obligations, no debts owed. You'll give me enough to start fresh somewhere else and we'll part as friends. And if it is real," she met his eyes steadily, "then we'll face that when we come to it." Isaac smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "You have my word, though I think you're going to be surprised, Hannah Zimmerman. I don't believe for a moment that what I'm feeling is going to fade." They left at dawn 2 days later. Hannah had packed her few belongings, everything she owned fitting into 2 bags that Isaac secured behind his saddle. She'd milked the cow one last time and turned it loose to join the wild cattle that roamed the territory. The chickens she'd brought to her nearest neighbor, a Mexican family 5 miles north who'd been kind to her after Thomas died. Leaving the small house where she'd lived with Thomas should have hurt more. Instead, she felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. Maybe Isaac was right. Maybe she'd been existing rather than living, going through the motions because it was easier than facing the truth that her old dreams were dead, and she needed new ones. The ride to Silverton took most of the day. Isaac, still not fully recovered, tired more easily than he wanted to admit, though he tried to hide it. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and share the food Hannah had packed. The territory spread around them in shades of red and gold, mountains rising in the distance, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Tell me about your sister," Hannah said during one of their rest stops. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood, sharing water from Isaac's canteen. "Margaret is 19, stubborn as a mule, and convinced she knows better than everyone about everything," Isaac said, but his voice was full of affection. "Father sent her to a finishing school in Boston 3 years ago. She hated every minute of it but refused to come home until she'd completed the full program, just to prove she could. She came back for Father's funeral and decided to stay, much to the horror of her Eastern friends. She sounds formidable. She is. She's been running the household accounts and managing half the business correspondence while I've been gone. Webb probably assumed she'd be easy to manipulate, but Margaret has Father's head for business and a spine of steel. Will she approve of me?" Isaac looked at her, his expression softening. "She'll love you. How could she not?" Silverton appeared in the afternoon sun, bigger than Hannah had remembered from her few trips to town with Thomas. The main street bustled with activity. Wagons and horses, people moving between shops and businesses. At the far end of town, she could see the railway depot, and beyond it, the land began to rise toward the mountains. Isaac led them through town, nodding to people who called greetings and stared at Hannah with undisguised curiosity. She could already hear the gossip starting, could imagine the conversations that would happen behind closed doors. But she kept her head high, her back straight. Let them talk. She had nothing to be ashamed of. The Zane ranch lay 5 miles past town, and the sight of it made Hannah's breath catch. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure of adobe and wood, with a wide porch wrapped around the front and sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape. Bunkhouses, barns, corrals, a smithy. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see men working, tiny figures against the vastness of the land. A young woman burst from the front door before they'd even dismounted, her dark hair flying loose from its pins. "Isaac," she launched herself at her brother, who caught her with a laugh and a wince. "Easy, Maggie, I'm still healing." Margaret pulled back, her eyes scanning him critically. "Healing? From what? Your telegram said you were delayed by business in Santa Fe. You've been gone 3 weeks, Isaac." 3 weeks with no word except one cryptic telegram. I was starting to think. Her voice broke. "I know, I'm sorry." Isaac kept one arm around his sister's shoulders, turning to help Hannah dismount with the other. "Margaret, this is Hannah Zimmerman. She saved my life." Margaret's sharp brown eyes fixed on Hannah, taking in everything in an instant. "Saved your life? Isaac, what happened?" "Let's go inside," Isaac said. "It's a long story." Over coffee in the ranch house's spacious kitchen, Isaac told his sister everything. Webb's ambush, Hannah finding him, the days of fever, his slow recovery. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively more furious. "That bastard," she said when Isaac finished. "We have to go to the sheriff. And tell him what? That I survived an ambush I can't prove," Webb ordered. "We need evidence, Maggie, not just accusations. Then we'll get evidence." Margaret turned to Hannah. "And you, Mrs. Zimmerman, are a godsend. My brother is notoriously stubborn about accepting help. The fact that you managed to keep him alive and still is remarkable." "Hannah," she said quietly. "Please, just Hannah." Something in her tone made Margaret's expression soften. "Hannah, then." "And I'm Margaret, though this idiot calls me Maggie when he wants to annoy me." She shot her brother a look that was part exasperation, part relief. "You're welcome here as long as you want to stay. Any friend of Isaac's is family to me." "Actually," Isaac said carefully, "I was hoping Hannah might stay for a while. Her homestead is remote, and with Webb's men still out there, I don't think it's safe for her to go back." Margaret's gaze moved between her brother and Hannah, and understanding dawned in her eyes. A slow smile spread across her face. "I see. Well, in that case, Hannah should definitely stay. We have plenty of room, and honestly, I could use another woman around here. It gets tiresome being the only female in a house full of men." "I don't want to impose," Hannah started, but Margaret waved her off. "Nonsense. You saved my brother's life. That makes you family in my book. Besides," she added with a mischievous look at Isaac, "something tells me you'll be around for a while." A ranch hand brought Hannah's bags to a guest room on the second floor, a space larger than her entire house had been. The bed was a massive four-poster covered in a colorful quilt, and real curtains hung at the windows. A washstand with a porcelain basin stood in one corner, and the wardrobe was carved from dark wood that gleamed in the afternoon light. "This is too much," Hannah said, but Margaret just laughed. "Wait until you see the bathtub. Hot water on demand, courtesy of the heating system Isaac installed last year. Very modern. Father thought he was crazy, but I've been grateful for it every day since." After Margaret left her to settle in, Hannah stood at the window looking out over the ranch. From here, she could see the corrals where men were working with horses, the bunkhouse where smoke rose from a chimney, the vast expanse of land that seemed to go on forever. Somewhere out there was her small homestead, already feeling like something from another life. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. But when she thought about Isaac's hand covering hers at her kitchen table, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting, her doubts wavered. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Isaac stood in the hallway, his hand raised to knock again. "Am I disturbing you?" "No, please, come in." Then she remembered propriety and stepped back. "Or perhaps not. I don't know the rules here." "The rules are that you're a guest and my sister is right down the hall," Isaac said, but he stayed in the doorway. "I wanted to make sure you're comfortable, that you don't regret coming." "It's overwhelming," Hannah admitted. "Your home, your life, it's all so far from anything I've known." "Does that bother you?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "Not bother exactly. But Isaac, you have to understand I'm a farmer's widow. I've spent the last year wearing the same 3 dresses, eating beans and cornbread, worrying about whether I could afford seed for planting. This," she gestured at the room, the house, everything beyond, "this is like a dream, and I'm afraid I'm going to wake up." Isaac stepped into the room then, propriety be damned, and took both her hands in his. "You're not dreaming. This is real, Hannah, and I meant what I said. I want to court you properly. I want to know everything about you, what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what you want from life beyond just surviving. And what if what I want isn't compatible with what you can offer? Then we'll figure it out together." He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made her heart race. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking for the chance to be part of your life, whatever that looks like." Over the next weeks, Hannah found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. Margaret was as formidable as Isaac had promised, but also warm and funny, with a wicked sense of humor that frequently left Hannah laughing until her sides hurt. The two women fell into an easy friendship, spending mornings together managing household affairs and afternoons on various projects around the ranch. Isaac was attentive but respectful, courting Hannah with a patience that both frustrated and charmed her. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, taught her to ride his gentlest mare, shared his favorite books with her. They took long walks in the evening after dinner, talking about everything under the stars. "Tell me about your parents," Hannah said one night as they sat on the porch swing, the ranch quiet around them. Margaret had retired early, leaving them chaperoned only by the distant presence of ranch hands in the bunkhouse. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his arm stretched along the back of the swing behind her shoulders, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Father was a force of nature," he said finally. "He came west after the war with nothing but a horse and determination. Built the ranch from scratch, fought off rustlers and drought, and every other disaster the territory could throw at him. He believed in this land, believed it could be something more than just a place where the strong crushed the weak. It sounds like you admired him very much." "I did. But he was also hard, demanding. Nothing was ever quite good enough. Margaret and I both spent our childhoods trying to earn his approval." Isaac's hand dropped to Hannah's shoulder, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her sleeve. "When he died, I inherited everything, including all his unfinished battles. Curtis Webb was his nemesis for years. Father wouldn't sell him an inch of land or a drop of water. Now Webb thinks I'll be easier to break. He's wrong about that." Isaac smiled down at her. "You sound very certain." "I am. I've seen you at your weakest, Zane, delirious with fever and barely able to stand. But even then you were fighting. You're your father's son in that way." "I'd rather be my own man," Isaac said quietly. Father's way was to fight everything head-on, to never compromise or show weakness. But I think there's strength in knowing when to bend, when to work with people instead of against them. Is that why you're courting a poor widow instead of the banker's daughter or the mayor's niece?" She'd meant it lightly, but Isaac turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm courting you because, from the moment I woke up and saw you sitting beside my bed, I knew you were the strongest person I'd ever met. You survived losses that would have broken most people. You built a life with your own hands. You took in a stranger and saved his life, not knowing if I was worth saving or if I'd bring trouble to your door." "You did bring trouble," Hannah pointed out, but her voice was breathless. "I know, and you handled it with grace." His hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "Hannah, these weeks with you have been the happiest I've been in longer than I can remember. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You see me, not just the Zane heir or the ranch owner, but me. How could I not want to be near you?" She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "This is happening very fast. We can slow down if you need to." "That's not what I said." When she opened her eyes, Isaac was smiling. "No, I suppose it wasn't. May I kiss you, Hannah?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. It had been so long since anyone had held her, kissed her, made her feel like a woman rather than just a survivor. But this wasn't Thomas, and that realization brought a pang of guilt even as heat pooled in her stomach. "I feel like I'm betraying his memory," she whispered. "You're not. You're living, which is what he would have wanted for you." Isaac's voice was gentle. "But if you're not ready, I can wait. I will wait, Hannah, however long it takes. That patience, that understanding broke through her last hesitation. Hannah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, answering his question without words. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Isaac's arm came around her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made her forget everything except the feeling of his mouth on hers, his hand in her hair, the thundering of her pulse. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah was half in Isaac's lap, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Oh," she said inadequately. Isaac laughed, the sound low and rough. "Yeah, oh," he pressed his forehead to hers. "I should probably let you go before Margaret comes out to check on us and finds us in a compromising position." "Probably," Hannah agreed, but neither of them moved. Hannah. Her name was a question and a prayer. "I'm falling in love with you. I need you to know that. This isn't just attraction or gratitude. I'm falling and I don't want to stop." Joy and terror warred in her chest. "I think I'm falling too," she admitted, "and it terrifies me." "We'll be terrified together then." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "Together is the important part." But their peaceful courtship couldn't last forever. Curtis Webb made his move on a hot afternoon in late May. Hannah was in town with Margaret, buying fabric for new dresses, when a commotion outside drew everyone to the windows. Webb himself stood in the middle of the street, flanked by 6 hard-looking men with guns prominently displayed on their hips. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. His voice carried clearly through the afternoon air. "I'm looking for Isaac Zane. Someone told me he was in town today." Hannah exchanged worried glances with Margaret. Isaac had ridden into town that morning to meet with the territorial judge about water rights, explicitly to avoid confronting Webb until they had legal backing for their position. But now here was Webb, forcing the confrontation in the most public way possible. "Stay here," Margaret said, but Hannah was already moving toward the door. "If there's going to be trouble, another witness won't hurt." They emerged onto the wooden sidewalk just as Isaac appeared from the direction of the courthouse. He moved with deliberate casualness, his hand nowhere near his gun, but Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Webb," Isaac said mildly, "this is quite a production. Usually you just send your men to do your threatening." Webb's smile was thin and cold. "Now, Isaac, don't be unfriendly. I heard a wild rumor that you'd been killed by bandits on the road to Santa Fe. I wanted to see with my own eyes that you were well. As you can see, I'm fine." Must have been mistaken identity. Easy mistake to make out on the lonely roads. Terrible things happen out there. Men disappear, never to be seen again. The threat was barely veiled. Hannah found herself moving before she thought about it, walking out into the street to stand beside Isaac. Margaret hissed her name, but she ignored it. "Mr. Webb," Hannah said clearly, "how fortunate that Isaac has so many friends looking out for him. I'm sure the territorial marshal will be interested to hear about these bandits you mentioned. He's been very concerned about lawlessness in the area." Webb's attention fixed on her, his eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" "Hannah Zimmerman." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Zimmerman." Webb turned the name over. "The widow with that failing homestead south of town. What's your interest in Zane business, Mrs.?" "Zimmerman is a guest at the ranch," Isaac said, his voice hardening. "And you'll speak to her with respect or not at all." "A guest." Webb's smile turned knowing. How convenient. The grieving widower and the lonely widow both finding comfort in their mutual sorrow. Quite the romance. "That's enough." Isaac took a step forward, and Webb's men all tensed, hands moving toward their guns. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Hannah could feel the eyes of the whole town watching, waiting to see if blood would be spilled in the street. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her expression neutral. Sheriff Dawson emerged from his office, a grizzled man in his 60s who moved with the careful authority of someone who'd seen too many situations like this escalate. "Gentlemen," he said, positioning himself between Isaac and Webb, "let's all keep our heads. Webb, you and your men move along. Isaac's alive and well, as you can see. No need for further conversation." "No need at all," Webb agreed. But his eyes promised this wasn't over as he tipped his hat to Hannah, the gesture mocking. "Mrs. Zimmerman, a pleasure. I do hope you're careful. These lonely roads can be so dangerous, as I mentioned. Terrible things happen to people who involve themselves in business that doesn't concern them." He turned and walked away, his men falling into formation around him. The tension slowly drained from the street as people began moving again, conversations resuming in nervous bursts. "Inside," Margaret said, appearing at Hannah's elbow. "Now, before you do anything else brave and stupid." Back in the general store, Hannah's hands started shaking. The adrenaline that had kept her steady was draining away, leaving her weak-kneed. Isaac guided her to a chair, kneeling in front of her, his hands covering hers. "That was incredibly foolish," he said, but his voice was gentle. "And incredibly brave. Hannah, you could have been hurt. So could you. He was trying to provoke you into drawing on him in front of witnesses. Then his men would have shot you down and claimed self-defense." "I know. And you stopped it from escalating, but at what cost?" Isaac's jaw tightened. "Now Webb knows you're important to me. He'll use that against us. Let him try." Hannah's voice was stronger now, the fear burning away into anger. "I'm not afraid of Curtis Webb." "You should be," Margaret said quietly. "Isaac, she needs to know what she's dealing with." Isaac stood, running a hand through his hair. Around them, the store owner and other customers were carefully pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "Let's go home," Isaac said. "We can talk there." The ride back to the ranch was tense and quiet. Once they were safely inside the house, Isaac poured whiskey for all of them, propriety forgotten in the face of genuine fear. "Webb has killed before," he said without preamble. "Nothing that could be proven in court, but everyone knows. Small ranchers who wouldn't sell. A farmer who tried to file a claim on land Webb wanted. They all ended up dead or missing. The territorial authorities know but can't touch him. He's too careful, always has alibis, always makes it look like accidents or random violence." "Your father fought him," Hannah said, "for years. It cost him dearly. Our mother died when a wagon she was riding in went off a cliff. The official verdict was that the horses spooked, but father always believed Webb's men cut the brake line. He could never prove it." Isaac's voice was flat, controlled, but Hannah could hear the pain underneath. "That was 15 years ago. Webb has only gotten more powerful since then. Why doesn't someone stop him?" "Who?" Margaret spoke up. "The sheriff is old and outgunned. The territorial marshal is spread too thin. The judge is sympathetic but powerless without evidence. And most people are too afraid to stand against him. So he just wins. He takes everything and no one can stop him." "We're trying," Isaac said. "We've been building a case, getting affidavits from people he's intimidated, documenting every instance of harassment and violence. But it's slow, and in the meantime, he's escalating. The ambush that nearly killed me was the boldest move he's made yet." Hannah set down her glass, her mind working. An idea was forming, dangerous and possibly insane, but it might work. What if we beat him at his own game? Both Isaac and Margaret looked at her questioningly. Webb's power comes from fear and from owning things correct. Land, water rights, businesses. People do what he wants because they're afraid of losing what they have. "Yes," Isaac said slowly. "So what if we took away his power? What if we organized the small ranchers and farmers, created a cooperative that shares resources? If everyone pools their water rights, their land, they'd be stronger together than Webb could be alone. He can't kill or intimidate everyone. Margaret was staring at her with something like awe. That's actually brilliant. It's dangerous, Isaac countered. Hannah, asking people to stand against Webb means putting them in his crosshairs. They're already in his crosshairs, Hannah said. At least this way they have a chance to fight back. Over the next weeks, they worked in secret, reaching out to trusted neighbors and friends. The response was better than Hannah had dared hope. Years of living under Webb's thumb had built up resentment and anger. When given the option to fight back together, people grabbed it with both hands. Hannah found herself at the center of the planning, using her experience as a small farmer to understand the struggles and needs of others like her. She had credibility that Isaac, for all his good intentions, lacked. She was one of them, not the wealthy rancher trying to tell them what to do. And through it all, Isaac was beside her, supporting her ideas, backing her decisions, looking at her with such pride and love that it made her chest ache. Their courtship had evolved into something deeper during these intense weeks of planning. They moved as a unit now, finishing each other's sentences, working in perfect sync. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting with a group of farmers from the eastern part of the territory, Isaac walked Hannah out to the porch. The summer air was warm and sweet, stars blazing overhead. "Marry me," Isaac said without preamble. Hannah's breath caught. "What, marry me?" He took both her hands, his expression earnest. "I know it's fast, I know we've only known each other a few months, but Hannah, I don't want to wait. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness, and the way you see solutions where everyone else sees only problems. I love waking up knowing I'll see you at breakfast and going to bed thinking about your smile. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Joy surged through her, followed immediately by doubt. "Isaac, I'm still in mourning. People will talk. They'll say I dishonor Thomas's memory. Then we'll wait to make it public if you want. But Hannah, I need to know you're mine. That we're building this future together, not just as partners in fighting Webb, but as husband and wife." She thought about Thomas, about the quiet, steady love they'd shared. Would he want her to refuse happiness out of devotion to his memory? No. Thomas had been practical above all else. He would have wanted her to survive, to thrive, to find joy where she could. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Isaac swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, both of them grinning against each other's lips. "I don't have a ring yet," he said. "I wanted to ask first. I don't need a ring." But even as she said it, Isaac was fishing something out of his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "Father gave it to me before he died, said I'd know when I found the right woman. I knew the moment I woke up and saw you, Hannah. I think some part of me has been yours since that day." She let him slide the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "When?" she asked. "As soon as you're ready. Tomorrow if you want, or next month, or next year, whenever you say." Hannah thought about it. The proper mourning period for a widow was a year, and she still had 3 months to go. But propriety seemed less important now, with Webb's threats hanging over them and the cooperative to build. Life was uncertain. Why waste time pretending she wasn't in love with Isaac when everyone who mattered already knew? 2 weeks, she decided. That gives us time to finish organizing the cooperative and prepare properly. And, she added with a smile, it gives me time to make a decent dress. I will not get married in these old things I've been wearing. Margaret was thrilled when they told her, immediately throwing herself into wedding preparations with the energy of a general planning a campaign. The ceremony would be small, just close friends and family, held at the ranch rather than in town where it would become a spectacle. But Webb, predictably, heard about it. A week before the wedding, a messenger arrived with an envelope addressed to Hannah. Inside was a formal letter, written in elegant script. "Mrs. Zimmerman," it read, "I understand congratulations are in order on your upcoming nuptials. How fortunate that you've landed on your feet after such tragedy. I wonder if Mr. Zane knows about the debts your late husband left behind. The taxes unpaid on your homestead. It would be a shame if such financial difficulties were to cast a shadow on your happy day. Of course, these matters could be resolved if you were to convince your intended to be more reasonable in his business dealings. I remain your humble servant, Curtis Webb." Hannah read the letter twice, then handed it to Isaac without comment. She watched his face darken as he scanned the contents. "He's bluffing," Isaac said finally, "trying to intimidate you. Is he, though?" Hannah's voice was calm. "I don't know what debts Thomas might have left. We struggled that last year. He might have borrowed money I didn't know about. And the taxes, I couldn't pay them after he died. I just assumed they'd take the property eventually. How much could it possibly be?" The answer came the next day when Hannah made the trip into town to check the county records. Thomas had borrowed against the homestead to buy seed and equipment that last spring, loans that had come due after his death. With interest, the amount was staggering, nearly $300. The property taxes added another $50. Money Hannah had no hope of paying. Isaac offered to settle the debts immediately, but Hannah refused. "That's not the point. Webb is trying to prove that he can hurt me, that marrying you means living under constant threat. He wants me to be afraid." "And are you?" Hannah looked at the ring on her finger, thinking about everything she'd survived. "No, I'm angry, and I'm more determined than ever to see him defeated." The cooperative officially formed 3 days before the wedding. 27 ranchers and farmers signed the charter, pooling their water rights and agreeing to share resources. It wasn't enough to break Webb's power completely, but it was a start. More importantly, it showed that people were willing to stand together. Webb's response was swift. 2 of the cooperative members had their fences cut, cattle scattered. Another found his well poisoned. The harassment was designed to terrify people into backing out, but it had the opposite effect. More people signed on, furious at Webb's bullying tactics. Hannah's wedding day dawned clear and warm. Margaret had helped her make a dress of soft blue cotton, simple but elegant. No white, not for a widow remarrying, but Hannah thought the blue suited her better anyway. It matched Isaac's eyes when he looked at her with love. They gathered in the ranch house's parlor, surrounded by Margaret, a handful of ranch hands who'd become friends, and the families of several cooperative members. The circuit judge who'd been helping them build their case against Webb performed the ceremony, his voice grave but warm as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Isaac kissed her, sealing their vows, Hannah felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. Not the scared girl who'd left Missouri, not the struggling widow barely surviving, but Hannah Zane, partner to a good man, fighter for a better future. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Margaret had organized a feast and someone produced a fiddle. They danced in the evening light, Hannah's head on Isaac's shoulder, both of them swaying to the music. "Happy," Isaac murmured against her hair. "Happier than I thought I'd ever be again." "Good." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you stay that way." Their wedding night was everything it should be, tender and passionate and healing in ways Hannah hadn't known she needed. Isaac was patient, letting her set the pace, erasing the last shadows of grief until there was only the 2 of them, learning each other in the darkness. Afterward, wrapped in her husband's arms, Hannah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. But Webb wasn't finished. He escalated his campaign over the summer, targeting cooperative members with increasing violence. Barns burned. Livestock died. People were beaten on the road. The territorial marshal sent additional men, but they couldn't be everywhere. Isaac hired guards for the most vulnerable families, but it wasn't enough. The cost in money and fear was mounting. Hannah could see the strain on her husband, the weight of responsibility he carried for every person who joined their cause. "We need to end this," she said one night in late August. They were in their bedroom, the windows open to catch any breeze. "Before someone gets killed." "I'm open to suggestions," Isaac said tiredly. He'd been up most of the night before, helping fight a fire at a cooperative member's property. Hannah had been thinking about this for weeks, turning the problem over in her mind. "We need evidence, something concrete that ties Webb directly to the violence. Without that, he'll always hide behind his men. We've tried. He's too careful. Then we make him careless. We give him a target too tempting to resist." She took a breath. "We use me." Isaac sat up abruptly. "Absolutely not. Hear me out. I'm his weak point. He thinks I'm just some poor widow who got lucky. If I were to publicly challenge him, accuse him of the attacks, he might get angry enough to act directly. Or he might just have you killed. Not if I'm too public, too watched. If the territorial marshal is involved, if we have witnesses ready, Webb would have to be there himself to make sure it's done right. Hannah, I won't risk you." End of discussion. But Hannah was not the type of woman to accept dictates, even from her husband. Over the next week, she quietly made her own plans, enlisting Margaret and several cooperative members she'd grown close to. When everything was ready, she presented the whole thing to Isaac as a done deal. His fury was impressive. "You went behind my back, because I knew you'd say no. I'm saying no now. Too bad. It's already set up. Webb has received a letter from me, accusing him publicly of orchestrating the attacks. The territorial marshal knows. The judge knows. Half the town knows. I've made myself too visible for him to ignore or quietly eliminate. He has to respond, and when he does, we'll be ready. And if we're not, if something goes wrong," Hannah took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Isaac, I didn't survive losing everything, didn't build a new life from nothing, didn't fall in love with you just to spend the rest of my days hiding from bullies. We end this now together, or Webb wins by making us too afraid to live." He closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, the anger had faded into resignation and reluctant admiration. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, and the most infuriating. I know. It's part of my charm." Despite his misgivings, Isaac threw himself into making Hannah's plan as safe as possible. Extra guards, contingency plans, signals worked out with the marshal and his men. When the day came for Hannah's public confrontation with Webb, the whole town turned out to watch. Hannah stood on the courthouse steps, Isaac beside her, Margaret on her other side. The territorial marshal and 4 of his deputies flanked them. Below, the street was packed with people. Webb arrived precisely on time, making an entrance with his usual entourage of armed men. "Mrs. Zane," he said, his voice carrying in the afternoon heat. "You wanted to speak with me." "Mr. Webb." Hannah kept her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to publicly accuse you of orchestrating the campaign of violence and intimidation against the members of the Silverton Valley Cooperative. You have burned barns, killed livestock, poisoned wells, and assaulted innocent people, all in an attempt to maintain your monopoly on land and water in this territory. Those are serious accusations. I assume you have proof. We have testimony from your own men. This was a gamble. They'd managed to convince one of Webb's hired guns to turn witness, but he was hidden away for his own safety. We have records of property damage that coincides with your attempts to buy those same properties. We have a pattern of violence that goes back 15 years. Webb's genial mask slipped for just a moment, cold fury showing through. Testimony from criminals looking to reduce their own sentences. Circumstantial evidence at best. You have nothing that would stand up in court, Mrs. Zane. Perhaps, but I have this. Hannah produced a leather-bound journal from her bag. Your man Sam Peterson kept detailed records of every job you ordered. Names, dates, amounts paid. He was quite thorough. That was a lie. The journal existed, but it was coded, nothing that could be used directly as evidence. But Hannah was betting that Webb didn't know that. She was betting that the existence of the journal itself would panic him into acting. She won her bet. Webb's face went white, then red. Give me that journal. I think not. I've already given copies to the territorial marshal and the federal authorities. It's over, Mr. Webb. Your reign of terror ends today. Webb's hand moved toward his gun, and everything seemed to happen at once. Isaac shoved Hannah behind him. The marshal's deputies drew their weapons. Webb's men reached for theirs. For one terrible moment, it seemed like the street would erupt in gunfire. Then Sheriff Dawson's voice cut through the tension. Don't do it, Curtis. It's over. I've got 3 rifles trained on you from windows across the street. Your men stand down and this ends peacefully. You fight, and you all die right here. The standoff held for several heartbeats. Then, slowly, Webb raised his hands away from his gun. His men followed suit, clearly more interested in self-preservation than loyalty. You're making a mistake, Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew he'd lost. The only mistake was made 15 years ago when you killed your first person and got away with it, the marshal said. Curtis Webb, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, assault, destruction of property, and about 20 other charges. We'll sort out the full list once we get you to jail. As the deputies moved in to disarm and arrest Webb's men, Isaac pulled Hannah into his arms, his face buried in her hair. Never again, he said, his voice shaking. Promise me you'll never take a risk like that again. I can't promise that, but I can promise I'll always come home to you. The trial took place that fall in Santa Fe, with the full attention of the territorial government focused on it. Webb's hired gun testified in exchange for a reduced sentence, and the coded journal, once deciphered by a clerk with experience in such matters, proved to be even more damning than Hannah had hoped. Webb was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. With Webb gone, his empire collapsed remarkably quickly. His property and holdings were sold off to pay his debts and legal fees. The Silverton Valley Cooperative bought the water rights at a fair price, distributing them among their members. For the first time in decades, the valley was free from the shadow of fear. Hannah and Isaac threw themselves into building the future they'd fought for. The cooperative thrived, expanding to include nearly every farmer and small rancher in the territory. They implemented systems for sharing resources, for helping families in need, for ensuring that no one person could ever again accumulate Webb's kind of power, and through it all, their love deepened. The passionate intensity of their courtship matured into something richer, more complex. They learned each other's rhythms, their strengths and weaknesses, their hopes and fears. They argued and made up, laughed and occasionally cried, built a partnership that was stronger than the sum of its parts. Hannah discovered she was pregnant in the spring, nearly a year after their wedding. Isaac was overjoyed, immediately becoming absurdly protective. Margaret teased him mercilessly about it, but Hannah found his concern endearing, even when it drove her crazy. Their son was born in December during a rare snowstorm, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the whole household. They named him Thomas, for Hannah's first husband, and James, for Isaac's father. Little Tommy, as he quickly became known, was dark-haired like his father with his mother's blue eyes, and a temperament that suggested he'd be as stubborn as both his parents. Holding her son with Isaac's arm around her shoulders and Margaret cooing at her nephew, Hannah felt a sense of completion she'd never expected to find. She'd lost so much: her parents, her first husband, her home, her old dreams. But from that loss, she'd built something new and beautiful. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something entirely its own. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "That I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts. They led me here to this." "I'm the grateful one," Isaac said. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Hannah Zane." As the years passed, the Zane family grew. 2 more children followed Tommy, a daughter they named Sarah, fierce and fearless like her Aunt Margaret, and another son they called William, quiet and thoughtful. The ranch prospered, the cooperative expanded, and Silverton grew from a rough frontier town into a real community. Hannah never forgot her roots or the struggles she'd faced. She used her position to help other widows and struggling families, creating programs through the cooperative to provide support and resources. Her old homestead was donated to a young couple just starting out, the place where she'd nursed a wounded stranger back to health, becoming a home for new dreams. Margaret eventually married a lawyer from Santa Fe, a man named Daniel who matched her strength with his own gentle wisdom. They settled in Silverton, and Margaret continued to be deeply involved in running the ranch alongside her brother. She and Hannah remained as close as sisters, their friendship one of the great constants in both their lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Hannah back to the spot where she'd found him, where their story had truly begun. They sat together on the red earth, watching the sun set over the valley they'd fought so hard to protect. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Taking me in that day? Your life would have been simpler if you'd just let me lie there." Hannah looked at him, at the silver just beginning to show in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of laughter and worry, the hands that had held hers through every joy and sorrow. "Not for a single moment." "You're the best decision I ever made, Isaac Zane. Even when I'm stubborn and overprotective, especially then." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love Thomas, and I'll always be grateful for the time we had. But you, Isaac, you're my great love, the one I was meant to find. Sometimes I think that gunshot in the canyon was fate, bringing us together." "I prefer to think of it as exceptional good luck," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though I'll admit, being shot was a terrible way to meet one's future wife." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had watched over Hannah's desperate attempts to save a dying stranger, over their courtship and wedding, over every triumph and struggle since. The land around them was quiet and peaceful. The violence of those early days faded into memory. Their children were safe at home with Margaret, probably running their aunt ragged. The ranch was thriving, the cooperative was strong, and the valley was free. It was everything Hannah's parents had dreamed of when they'd headed west all those years ago. A place where hard work and courage could build something lasting, where justice was possible, where love could flourish even in the harsh beauty of the wilderness. "We should head back," Hannah said eventually. "Margaret will have her hands full with the children in a minute." Isaac pulled her closer. "Let me hold my wife a little longer while we're alone. These moments are rare with 3 children at home." Hannah laughed but settled against him, content to linger. They'd built a good life together, she and Isaac, from the unpromising beginning of blood and fever and fear. They'd faced down danger and emerged stronger. They'd created a family, a community, a legacy that would outlast them both. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, their horses moving at an easy pace through the twilight. Lights glowed in the windows of the house, warm and welcoming. Hannah could hear her children's laughter even before they dismounted. Tommy and Sarah arguing about something while William tried to mediate, Margaret's voice rising above it all with exasperated affection. "Home," Isaac said, helping Hannah down from her horse. "Home," she agreed, taking his hand. They'd come a long way from that day in the canyon, the wounded stranger and the widow who'd saved him. But standing here now, about to walk into their warm, noisy, chaotic home, Hannah knew she wouldn't change a thing. Every struggle, every fear, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this place of belonging and love. She'd nursed a wounded stranger back to health, not knowing he owned half the valley. But more importantly, she'd opened her heart to hope again, and that had made all the difference. Because in saving Isaac's life, she'd somehow saved her own, finding a future she'd never dared to dream of in the wilds of New Mexico territory. Their story would be told for years to come in Silverton, the tale of how Hannah and Isaac Zane had brought down Curtis Webb and freed the valley. But for Hannah, the real story was simpler and more profound. It was about choosing courage over fear, about love growing in unexpected places, about the way two broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful from the pieces. As they walked into the house together, their children rushing to greet them, Margaret smiling from the kitchen doorway, Hannah felt the rightness of it all settle deep in her bones. This was her life now, full and rich and infinitely precious. The past would always be part of her, the memories of those she'd lost woven into the fabric of who she was. But the future stretched bright and promising before her, and she would face it the way she'd faced everything else, with courage, with hope, and with Isaac's hand in hers. The Wild West had tested her and forged her, taking a frightened widow and transforming her into a woman who could stand against injustice and win. But more than that, it had given her Isaac, her partner in all things, the love she'd found when she wasn't looking for it. Their children would grow up knowing the story of how their parents met, about the blood and bullets and bravery. They'd learn about the fight against Curtis Webb, about the cooperative their parents had built, about the community they'd helped create. But they'd also know the smaller, quieter truths. The way their father looked at their mother like she hung the moon, the way their mother's face lit up when their father walked into a room, the partnership of equals that had made everything else possible. They'd know that love wasn't always easy or simple, but that it was always worth fighting for. Years later, when Tommy was grown and beginning to take over management of the ranch, he would ask his mother about those early days, about what it had been like to find a wounded stranger and choose to help him despite the risk. "I was terrified," Hannah would admit, gray now threading through her blonde hair, her hands still strong from years of work. "But your father's horse kept nudging him, and I thought, any man whose horse is that loyal might be worth saving." "And was he?" Tommy would ask, grinning because he already knew the answer. "Every bit worth saving," Hannah would reply, looking across the porch to where Isaac sat with his grandson on his knee, telling stories about the old days, "and worth every moment since." Because that was the truth at the heart of their story. Not the drama of the confrontation with Webb, not even the building of the cooperative, but the simple fact that Hannah had looked at a bleeding stranger and seen someone worth saving. And in doing so, she'd saved herself, finding not just a second chance at love but a second chance at life itself. The valley prospered under their stewardship, growing and changing with the times while never forgetting the lessons of those hard early years. The Zane name became synonymous with fairness and community, with standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. And at the center of it all was the story of Isaac and Hannah, the wounded stranger and the widow who'd nursed him back to health, who'd fallen in love amid danger and uncertainty, who'd built something lasting from the raw materials of courage and hope. Their love story would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two people chose each other, chose courage, chose to fight for something better. It was a story of the Wild West at its best, hard but hopeful, dangerous but full of possibility, a place where love could bloom even in the harsh desert soil. And as Hannah lay in her husband's arms on their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered around them. She reflected on the long, unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. From that day in the canyon to this celebration of enduring love, it had been a life well lived, full of challenges met and overcome, of love given and received, of dreams realized beyond anything she could have imagined. "No regrets," Isaac whispered, his voice still strong despite his years. "Not a single one," Hannah replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You were worth saving, Isaac Zane, and this life we built together, it's been worth every moment." Outside, the New Mexico sun set over the valley they'd fought so hard to protect, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, surrounded by the family they'd created and the community they'd helped build, Hannah and Isaac held each other close, two souls who'd found each other against all odds and chosen every day to keep choosing each other. It was a love story for the ages, born in blood and danger, forged in courage and conviction, sustained by partnership and unwavering devotion. The kind of story that could only happen in the Wild West, where anything was possible for those brave enough to reach for it. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after.